August 9th, 1941, the sky above northern France. A Spitfire Mark V spirals downward, trailing smoke. The pilot inside has no legs. Both were amputated 10 years ago after a crash that should have ended his career forever. Yet here he is, 5 miles above enemy territory, fighting for his life. Squadron leader Douglas Bader reaches for the cockpit release. His artificial legs, made of metal and leather, nicknamed tin legs, make every movement awkward in the cramped cockpit. The Spitfire is disintegrating around him. He has seconds to escape. What he doesn't know is that the German pilot who just shot him down will become one of his closest friends for the next 42 years. This is the story of two warriors who met as enemies and became brothers. Douglas Robert Stewart Bader was born in London on February the 21st, 1910. His father served in the Great War and died when Douglas was young, leaving the family in difficult circumstances. But Douglas showed early promise. Athletic, competitive, fiercely determined. He joined the Royal Air Force in 1928 as a cadet at Cranwell. He wasn't just good, he was exceptional. By 1930, he'd earned his commission and was flying Bristol Bulldogs with No. 23 Squadron at Kenley. But Douglas Bader had a reckless streak. He loved aerobatics. He pushed boundaries. He performed low-level stunts that made senior officers nervous. He was brilliant in the air, but he took risks that terrified everyone who watched him fly. On December 14th, 1931, everything changed. Bader was visiting Reading Aero Club at Woodley Airfield. Some accounts say he was attempting low-level aerobatics. Others suggest he was simply showing off. What's certain is that his Bristol Bulldog clipped the ground during a roll at extremely low altitude. The aircraft cartwheeled across the field and disintegrated. Douglas Bader was pulled from the wreckage, barely alive. His right leg was crushed beyond repair, amputated above the knee that same day. His left leg was so badly damaged that doctors amputated it below the knee days later. He was 21 years old. His flying career was over. Except Douglas Bader didn't accept that. Recovery was brutal. Learning to walk on artificial legs, crude metal and leather prosthetics of the 1930s required months of painful rehabilitation. Most people would have given up. Bader demanded to fly again. The RAF said no. Medical regulations were clear. Pilots required 2 functioning legs. It was policy. It was final. Bader proved them wrong. He learned to drive a car with hand controls. He learned to play golf. He learned to dance. He walked without a cane. He even played tennis. He was so determined to appear normal that many people who met him never realized he had no legs. But the RAF wouldn't budge. In 1933, Bader was invalided out of the service. His flying career was officially over. He took a desk job with the Shell Oil Company and tried to build a civilian life. For 7 years, he lived in frustration, watching from the ground as the world moved toward war. Then, in 1939, everything changed again. Britain declared war on Germany. The RAF desperately needed pilots. Any pilots. Bader wrote letter after letter, demanding a chance to prove himself. Finally, they relented. In November 1939, Douglas Bader returned to active duty. By February 1940, he was flying Spitfires with No. 19 Squadron. By June 1940, during the Battle of France and Dunkirk evacuation, he'd scored his first kills. By March 1941, he was promoted to squadron leader and given command of 242 Squadron. The man with no legs had become one of the RAF's most aggressive and successful fighter pilots. On the other side of the English Channel, another pilot was making a name for himself. Adolf Galland was born on March 19, 1912, in Westerholt, Germany. Unlike Bader's rebellious nature, Galland was methodical, intelligent, and deeply professional. He joined the Luftwaffe in 1934 and flew with the Condor Legion during the Spanish Civil War, where he developed his skills in ground attack missions. But Galland's true talent emerged as a fighter pilot. By 1940, during the Battle of Britain, Galland was flying Messerschmitt Bf 109s with Jagdgeschwader 26. He was a natural ace, calm under pressure, an excellent marksman, and a tactical thinker. By June 1940, he'd been promoted to command of 3/JG-26. By November 1941, he would be promoted to General der Jagdflieger, General of Fighter Pilots, at just 29 years old. Galland was everything the Nazi propaganda machine wanted. Handsome, successful, charismatic. He was photographed with his trademark cigar, his chest covered in medals. Hitler himself praised him, but Galland was also something the regime didn't expect. A man with his own code of honor. By August 1941, Douglas Bader was leading the Tangmere Wing, 3 fighter squadrons flying offensive sweeps over occupied France. These circus operations were designed to draw Luftwaffe fighters into combat and relieve pressure on the Eastern Front, where Germany was invading the Soviet Union. Bader was aggressive, fearless, and effective. He'd developed his own fighter tactics, tight formations, coordinated attacks, relentless pursuit. He'd scored 22 confirmed victories. The Germans knew who he was. On August 9th, Bader led a sweep over northern France near Le Touquet. The mission went well initially. British fighters engaged German aircraft. Bader dove into the fight. Then, in the chaos of the dogfight, something went wrong. The exact details remain disputed. Bader believed he collided with a German Messerschmitt Bf 109. German records suggest he was shot down. What's certain is that Bader's Spitfire was hit, the tail section damaged or destroyed. The aircraft became uncontrollable. Bader needed to bail out immediately, but his artificial legs created a nightmarish problem. In the cramped Spitfire cockpit, his right leg, the one amputated above the knee, was strapped to the rudder pedal to give him control. As he tried to climb out, the leg remained trapped. The aircraft was spinning, diving toward Earth. G-forces pinned him to his seat. Bader pulled and twisted desperately. The straps holding his artificial leg finally broke. His right prosthetic leg remained trapped in the disintegrating Spitfire as Bader fell free, tumbling through the sky with only one artificial leg. His parachute opened. He descended slowly toward occupied France, knowing he was about to become a prisoner of war. Bader landed in a field near Saint-Omer. German soldiers captured him immediately. They were shocked to discover the famous RAF pilot had no legs. Word spread quickly through German military channels. Adolf Galland's unit, JG-26, had been involved in the combat that day. When Galland learned that Douglas Bader, the legless British ace, had been shot down, he insisted on meeting him. The meeting took place at the Luftwaffe officers' mess at Odenberg. Galland offered Bader a cigar. They sat together, 2 fighter pilots discussing tactics, aircraft, and the war. There was no hatred, no animosity, just professional respect between warriors. Bader explained his situation. His artificial leg was still in the wreckage of his Spitfire. He needed it to walk. Without both prosthetics, he was effectively immobile. Galland made an extraordinary decision. He contacted his superiors and proposed that the RAF be allowed to drop a replacement leg by parachute. The request went up the German chain of command, all the way to Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, and possibly even Adolf Hitler himself. They approved. The Germans contacted the British through the Red Cross with an astonishing offer. They would grant safe passage for an RAF aircraft to drop a replacement artificial leg for squadron leader Bader. No German fighters would intercept. It would be a humanitarian mission. The operation was codenamed Operation Leg. On August 19, 1941, a Bristol Blenheim bomber from No. 18 Squadron flew to Saint-Omer. The aircraft was escorted by Spitfires, ostensibly for protection, but the British couldn't resist. While the Blenheim dropped Bader's spare leg by parachute, the Spitfires bombed the German airfield. It was typical British cheekiness. The Germans were furious, but they'd kept their word. The leg was delivered safely. Bader got his leg, and he immediately tried to escape. Douglas Bader was sent to a German hospital, then to Stalag Luft III, the notorious POW camp for Allied airmen. But Bader had no intention of sitting out the war. He attempted escape so many times that the Germans threatened to confiscate his artificial legs. They eventually did, locking them away at night to prevent him from escaping after dark. It didn't stop him. Bader organized other escape attempts, helped dig tunnels, forged documents, and generally made himself such a problem that the Germans transferred him to Colditz Castle, the high-security prison reserved for the most difficult and escape-prone prisoners. Throughout his captivity, German officers treated him with surprising respect. Galland had spread the word. Bader was a warrior, not a criminal. He was to be treated according to the rules of war. This respect was extraordinary considering the circumstances. Bader was openly defiant, refusing to cooperate, constantly attempting escape. Yet German fighter pilots who visited the camps wanted to meet him. They asked him to sign photographs. They discussed aerial tactics with him. The war raged on, but among fighter pilots, British and German alike, Douglas Bader had become a legend. On April 15, 1945, American forces liberated Colditz Castle. Douglas Bader was free after 3 years and 8 months of captivity. He returned to Britain as a hero. He was promoted to group captain and awarded the Distinguished Service Order and Bar, the Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar, and appointed a commander of the Legion of Honor by France. He'd been mentioned in dispatches multiple times, but Bader's war achievements were only part of his story. The other part was still unfolding across the ruins of Germany. Adolf Galland had survived the war, but barely. After arguing repeatedly with Hermann Göring about Luftwaffe strategy and the mistreatment of fighter pilots, Galland had been removed from his position as General of Fighter Pilots in January 1945. He formed Jagdverband 44, an elite unit flying the revolutionary Me-262 jet fighter, and continued fighting until Germany's surrender. Galland was captured by American forces. Unlike many high-ranking German officers, he wasn't prosecuted for war crimes. He'd fought honorably, respected the rules of war, and had even protected Allied POWs when possible. After his release, Galland moved to Argentina, working as an aviation consultant. Later, he returned to Germany and became a successful businessman in the aviation industry. And then, in 1945, something remarkable happened. Douglas Bader and Adolf Galland met again after the war. The exact date of their first post-war meeting is unclear, but by the late 1940s they'd established contact. They discovered something extraordinary. They liked each other. This wasn't just professional respect between former adversaries. It was genuine friendship. They shared a bond that transcended nationality, politics, and the horrors of the war they'd fought. In 1953, Galland published his autobiography, The First and the Last. Douglas Bader wrote the foreword for the English edition, an astonishing gesture of reconciliation. In it, Bader praised Galland as an honourable opponent and a skilled pilot. They began meeting regularly. Galland visited Britain. Bader travelled to Germany. They attended aviation reunions together, appeared at air shows, and gave joint interviews. They became fixtures on the post-war aviation circuit, two legendary aces who'd fought each other and now stood together as friends. Photographs from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s show them side by side. Bader with his distinctive moustache and walking stick, Galland with his trademark cigar and easy smile. They're laughing together, shaking hands, reminiscing about the war. In one famous photograph, they're standing together at an airfield, both elderly men now, but their eyes still bright with the memory of those days when they soared above Europe, hunting each other through the clouds. Their friendship wasn't universally celebrated. Some British veterans were horrified that Bader would befriend a Nazi general. Some Germans criticised Galland for consorting with the enemy, but both men understood something that their critics didn't. They'd never been personal enemies. They'd fought for their countries. They'd followed orders. They'd shot down enemy aircraft because that was their duty. But they'd never hated each other. They'd recognised in each other the qualities they valued most: courage, skill, honour, and resilience. Bader and Galland represented a vanishing code of warfare, one where enemies could respect each other, where chivalry still mattered, where warriors honoured warriors regardless of which flag they served. Operation Leg perfectly encapsulated this code. In the middle of a brutal war, German officers had arranged for their enemy to receive medical equipment. They'd granted safe passage to an enemy aircraft. They'd shown compassion to a man who would return to trying to kill them if given the chance. And Bader, true to form, had used the leg to attempt escape and continue fighting. Both men appreciated the irony. Both men laughed about it years later. Douglas Bader left the RAF in 1946 and returned to Shell Oil, eventually becoming managing director of the aviation division. He became a tireless advocate for disabled people, proving through his own example that physical limitations didn't define human potential. He continued flying recreationally well into his later years. He never lost his love of aviation or his fighter pilot swagger. He could still walk into a room and command attention, not because of his disabilities, but because of his presence. Douglas Bader died on September 5th, 1982, at the age of 72. His funeral was held at St. Clement Danes Church in London. Hundreds attended, including former RAF pilots, disability advocates, and friends from around the world. Adolf Galland was there. The former Luftwaffe general stood among British veterans, paying his respects to the man who'd been his enemy and his friend. Adolf Galland lived 14 more years. He continued working in aviation, consulting for air forces and aerospace companies. He attended reunions and gave interviews, always speaking respectfully of his former adversaries. When asked about Bader, Galland would smile and say that the legless Englishman had been one of the finest fighter pilots he'd ever encountered, and one of the most stubborn men he'd ever met. Adolf Galland died on February the 9th, 1996, at the age of 83. The friendship between Douglas Bader and Adolf Galland lasted 42 years, longer than the entire duration of World War II by more than 30 years. Their story challenges simple narratives about war. They weren't just enemies who made peace. They were men who'd recognized in each other something deeper than politics or nationality, a shared humanity forged in the most inhuman of circumstances. Operation Leg has become one of the war's most famous anecdotes, a moment when chivalry broke through the machinery of total war. It's been retold in books, documentaries, and films. Some historians question certain details. Some debunk romanticized versions. But the core truth remains. German officers helped their enemy because it was the right thing to do. And that enemy spent the rest of his life trying to escape and fight again. That was the right thing to do, too. Douglas Bader proved that disability wasn't destiny. He flew without legs. He fought without legs. He survived 3 years as a POW without legs. He built a successful post-war career without legs. He inspired millions of disabled people to refuse limitations imposed by others. Adolf Galland proved that honor could survive even the most dishonorable regime. He fought for Germany, but he fought honorably. He protected POWs. He argued against war crimes. He treated enemies with respect. After the war, he worked for reconciliation rather than resentment. Together, they proved that enemies could become friends. Look at the photograph of them together in their later years. 2 old men, smiling, sharing a cigar. One British, one German. One missing both legs, one wearing medals from Hitler's Germany. Both legends, both warriors, both friends. They'd tried to kill each other once. They'd hunted each other through the skies above Europe. They'd been on opposite sides of history's most destructive war. And then they'd chosen friendship over hatred. They'd chosen respect over resentment. They'd chosen to see each other as men rather than as symbols of nations or ideologies. That choice, made again and again over 42 years, was more courageous than any aerial combat. Douglas Bader once said that losing his legs was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to prove what he could accomplish despite limitations. Adolf Galland once said that meeting Bader taught him that the best pilots weren't defined by the flags on their aircraft, but by the courage in their hearts. Their friendship didn't erase the war. It didn't make the horrors acceptable. It didn't resolve the moral complexity of fighting for Nazi Germany or bombing occupied Europe. But it proved something essential about human nature. We can choose what we become after the fighting stops. The legless ace and the Nazi general became brothers, not because they forgot the war, but because they understood that the war didn't have to define them forever. They'd fought with honor. They'd respected each other as enemies. And when the war ended, they had the courage to respect each other as friends. That's the real story behind Operation Leg. Not the humanitarian gesture, remarkable as it was, not even the incredible survival and achievement of a man who flew without legs. It's the story of 2 warriors who proved that even in war's darkest moments, humanity can survive, and after the war, it can flourish. Douglas Bader and Adolf Galland didn't just survive World War II. They transcended it. That's their legacy. That's why we remember them. Not just as pilots, but as men who chose friendship over eternal enmity. 2 aces, 1 war, 42 years of brotherhood,